All right, hey guys. So I go to school in the Midwest, right? And my campus has a power plant right on it here. I walked past this building just about every day my freshman year until, I don't know, one day I kind of realized it's a bit strange for a school to have a visible power plant, let alone like a coal power plant. I mean, I don't know. It kind of seems to me like a coal power plant seems like something that would have flown in the 80s or the 90s, but in 2024 and on a college campus, I mean, I don't know. This kind of seemed like something more people would be talking about. And as I was looking deeper, sort of into uh, energy, I stumbled upon this report published by the US Department of Energy with some crazy statistics. For example, in terms of total energy consumption, the Midwest region of the United States, where I currently am, is responsible for nearly 50% of the total energy consumption of coal within the United States. The Midwest as a region is very coal centric. Not just Indiana, but many of the neighboring states as well. And as you can see on this map over here, some of it does bleed over into states that aren't necessarily the Midwest. But I think that this topic is still worth exploring uniquely from a Midwestern perspective. And on that note, I think that there are few people better equipped to address this specific question than Professor Michael Leppert, who I had the fortune of taking a class with my freshman year. He is genuinely one of the funniest professors I've had, one of the most down to earth people I know, and the book he published, Flipping the Circle, is genuinely a great read of his time in politics within Indiana. So trust me when I say this man knows what he's talking about. So with that, I'd like to say thank you so much, Professor Leppert, for giving me the chance to even ask you these questions in the first place. I will be including a transcript with all the questions I asked Professor Leppert in the description for ease of access. Um, and I really hope you guys enjoy the content. Just word of warning, I look absolutely atrocious in this video. I hadn't realized that I look like that, so I will be limiting how much I appear on camera, but please don't let that take away from how amazing Professor Leppert's insights are. And I really hope that this video is at least enlightening on why this region is so dependent on coal in the first place. So with that, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Wait, guys. This is Editor Raj speaking from the future. Just give me 5 seconds. I'm sorry for interrupting. I know I said I'd continue the video, but just want to give a little bit of context before continuing. So, Professor Leppert and I actually had this conversation on January 15th, 2024, which those of you guys that know about the Iowa caucus might have picked up on because Professor Leppert talks about that later on. And it's currently the last week of February as I'm editing this. So, it was a little bit delayed, but I'm a college student. I had exams, midterms, so forgive me for that. I'm super excited to hear what you guys have to think about this. Just any comments, questions, leave them down below. I'll be more than happy to respond. And one, again, final note, so the little information box down below, in addition to already having segments of the video into the different questions I asked Professor Leppert, I've also included a few bullet points per each segment so you guys just have a better idea of what is also being covered outside maybe just the obvious first answer, since there is a lot of information in this video. So yes, I know that was a lot, but I'm done. Thank you guys so much for bearing with me so far. I hope you enjoy the rest of the video.
I was sitting up at my kitchen counter, and my wife was like, "What is this call about?" And I said, "A student wants to talk about coal," but I didn't do it. And I was sitting there thinking, I probably should have prepped a little bit for this.
No, 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 no. Like literally your
Okay,
personal experience
Midwest
is
region,
invaluable.
yeah, Midwest region energy sector risk profile. Okay, um, so to your question, do
Mhm.
I think it should be top down? Do I think it should be grassroots? I actually think that what has been successful in driving down the use of coal um, really started probably before this, but it was most obvious during the Obama administration in his pursuit of the clean power plan. What that tells energy markets, what it tells consumers when the government is moving towards something collectively and consistently and unwaveringly, that the decision is being made by a popular president, and that obviously ebbs and flows over time. But it was a sign of a change in perspective on how we should do lots of things when Obama got elected. And one of the things that he wanted to do was become more environmentally sound. And of course, politics has evolved over
Hmm.
the last 10 years in that regard. So to get back to your question, should it come top down? My answer is, as somebody who needed to be impartial when I was the executive director of the agency where I came from, our job was to be impartial triers of fact. And so we had to care about the industry, we had to care about the consumer, and we talked about this in our class about what the public interest is.
Hmm.
So I would tell you that it is my opinion that it should come from both directions,
Hmm.
and that a good bulk of American individual consumers, taxpayers, citizens want us to be cleaner, want us to be more modern, want us to find more efficient, better ways, renewable ways of generating power. Not everybody, but I think that the majority of Americans want that. So
Hmm.
government signals that they're going that way too. What that did was it started creating a difference in consumers. And so the map that you show is a good indicator of what's gone
Hmm.
on here in the Midwest. Um, Indiana was a top 10 or a low 10, depending on
Hmm.
how you want to phrase it, cheap power state for many, many
Hmm.
years. A couple of things made that possible. One was that we were burning a lot of dirty coal.
Hmm.
That was the big thing. The second thing was that we're a manufacturing state. And so
Hmm.
not only were we burning dirty coal, willing to burn dirty coal and willing to mine dirty coal,
Hmm.
our we were attractive to industry and manufacturing interests because of our willingness to do that and the
Hmm.
availability of that dirty coal from the Illinois basin that's down in southern
Hmm.
southern Indiana and southern Illinois, where the bulk of the coal came from. And
Hmm.
so for many years we enjoyed that. We enjoyed that situation from an economic respect.
Hmm.
So both of those things were playing together at the same time. And as consumers start to become more aware of the filthy nature of
Hmm.
coal, that sort of pushes politicians to respond to it. Then
Hmm.
politicians respond to it by coming out with things like the Clean Power Plan, and it sends signals to the markets, and they respond to it by voluntarily using less coal. There are plenty of times in the past 15 years where it would have been cheaper for utilities to continue to use high sulfur dirty coal like we have here in southern Indiana and southern Illinois. But signals from the market were saying that was not the right way to go. And the electric generation sector is so slow in moving
Hmm.
that when they get those signals and they're coming from both directions, there's a good reason for them to believe that they have to respond. And
Hmm.
so they stop building dirty coal plants and they start building cleaner natural gas plants, and they start looking
Hmm.
for cleaner ways to do it. And that large ship like the aircraft carrier or the
Hmm.
Titanic, which it takes a long time to move, starts moving, and it's very difficult to move it back. And
Hmm.
so I think the combination of I actually think it comes from the people
Hmm.
driving politicians that then drive down from above. And
Hmm.
so if I had to pick one, I would pick grassroots, because I think
Hmm.
grassroots force the government to then create policies that drive the kind of response that we've seen in the
Hmm.
beginning. And of course, it's very slow, but it's speeding up now.
Yeah.
Um, for me, I mean, this started a long time. This started before Obama, but it started speeding up during the Obama administration, and now it's impossible to turn it back. So when Trump takes over and has to deal with in his campaigning in a state like West Virginia, has been significantly and negatively impacted by people wanting to use less coal, and they're a
Yeah.
high coal producing state. When he campaigns and says, "I'm going to bring back coal," no, he's not.
Hmm.
No, he's not. I mean, it's just not. It's just and that's not just because I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. It's because it's just it's too far gone. The ship is now turned, and turning it back, it doesn't make any economic sense. And the markets are bigger than any president. And so that's where I think we are. And I think that those
Hmm.
those two things, grassroots and top down, have combined to drive the market and to turn that ship a little bit in such a way that it can't turn back. So
Mhm.
that's a 10-minute version, 10-minute answer to a simple question. But I think that as long as the roots and the tops are juicing each other, we'll
Mhm.
continue to keep that ship moving toward a more modern approach on how we generate
Yeah.
power.
No, definitely. Yeah, like that was again a fantastic response. Like I no, I think like yeah, I will always appreciate a longer response because like I think that just speaking to someone like you that's been like on both involved at kind of like a state level and also has a lot of experience, it's much more valuable than any kind of Google search ever would be. If you're aware, like how does like the current sort of energy infrastructure in the Midwest impact the feasibility and timeline of moving from coal? Because electric, solar, there's a lot of infrastructure, there's a lot of costs with that. Like in the Midwest, is our sort of energy infrastructure like is it entirely dependent on coal? Is it built to handle a robust switch?
I don't consider myself to be as versed in its capacity. Now, I still spend time with friends from the industry and friends from the regulatory space.
Mm-hmm.
I was just sniping with one of my buddies from Hoosier Energy a little bit ago.
Mm-hmm.
We're on different sides of politics, but we love making fun of each other. So with the Iowa caucuses going on, it's a day that we're going to be texting each other a lot. But he's an executive at Hoosier Energy, and we may have talked about this in class. The thing about energy transitions is just like I was mentioning earlier, is so slow from the spectator's perspective. I mean, if you're sitting back and in your shoes and you're learning all this stuff and you're learning historic trends and all that sort of stuff and becoming versed in it very, very quickly, it might seem laborious to you, but it's very, very quickly by comparison to how quickly the industry can change. Set aside some time to make fun of Texas. We are in we're in a better situation than ERCOT. You know, we're better on capacity and we're better on our transmission on our grid up here. It would be really embarrassing, and occasionally is embarrassing whenever we have grid trouble in this area part of the country because the Midwest, the MISO is located right here in Indianapolis or in Carmel, north of Indianapolis. It has been there since they started it back, 25 years ago. And so the traffic cop of the transmission grid from Manitoba all the way to the Gulf of Mexico and a large swath from east to west there is controlled here in Carmel, Indiana. And a lot of
Wow.
people don't even know that.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever there's a grid problem, it makes my shoulders go up like this and my neck shrink. It makes me tense because we should be the palace of that. We should be the epitome of good planning. So we have two things here that I think are filled with pressure. One is that transition from having these old coal plants that have been providing baseline power into the grid for many, many years are aging out. And so even if you didn't want to be responsive to the Clean Power Plan and the changing of the markets, you've got retirement pressure of
Mm-hmm.
plants that are a century old or 60, 80 years old that are time. It's decision time for a lot of our base load capacity in the Midwest, specifically here in Indiana and around Indiana where the base load has come from. Some plants in Kentucky, Michigan, and Illinois in particular that supply power to our state. And so they're getting old. And to plan for what comes after that is not really coming from roots or tops as much as it is time. It's
Mm-hmm.
just time to deal with these plants that have been fully depreciated and all that sort of stuff in rate base, and it's time to start choosing whether or not you're going to keep being what you were or you're going to
Mm-hmm.
be what you aspire to be. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think that our margins, and this is a good conversation and probably good for your report, is that during that time I was talking about when we were a top 10 or a low top 10 state on affordable electric power in Indiana, we also had what's known as excess capacity.
Mm-hmm.
We had way more power than we needed. We would sell more than we would buy. Uh, you know, we had more power. There was never really there was a long stretch of time there after the nuclear wave and before the shift. So from like early '80s through early 2000s, that 2 decades there,
Mm-hmm.
Indiana had way more power than it needed, and which also helped it become cheap, just typical supply and demand
Hmm.
um, pressures. Where we're at right now, the margins are very, very small.
Hmm.
And that is a notable shift that is significant and probably should run parallel with your uh, thesis or subject area about
Hmm.
moving away from coal. One of the pressures that comes from policymakers like the Indiana State House and every state house in the region is that 20 years ago, it was a decision purely about environmental versus price. Now
Hmm.
it's environmental, price, and capacity slash reliability. And so when you have, I don't know what that fireworks
Yeah.
thing is there. I don't know what I did that caused it. Uh, that's an additional pressure that people in the weeds, people who lived and worked in the space that I did, would think about a lot. We had a lot of reliability investigations that
Hmm.
that consumed 10-15% of my agency
Hmm.
back 20 or 25 years ago, and it was something that the media didn't cover, that because in America we turn the light switch on and the lights come on,
Hmm.
and when they go off, we go crazy. It's a travesty of justice. My stuff has been interrupted for whatever reason, and so reliability in America is expected to be perfect.
Hmm.
And on a small scale, on a micro scale, like you and I on using our lights and our computers, and on a macro scale, entire industries. The infrastructure problem is one of, in the region, excess capacity has been modified from being viewed as something that can help keep prices down and
Hmm.
reliability up into what it really is in true markets: waste. When you're generating more power than you can use or you can sell, you're wasting stuff.
Hmm.
That has put pressure on those retirements of old plants not being replaced with the same amount of power,
Hmm.
because there's no reason to do it if you can't sell it or you can't use it. And
Yeah.
so that pressure in the market is putting pressure on the original question that you were asking about the state of our infrastructure. Our capacity is shrunk because it was inefficient to have the excesses that we had before. And so with that efficiency gain comes higher risk on interruptions. There probably should be an expectation of having some interruptions of service in exchange for better pricing. For those of us who lived before the pandemic and now after,
Hmm.
we see all kinds of like grocery stores. You go into a grocery store, and oftentimes the meat that was always on the shelf before the pandemic, they sell out of. And the reason why is because they're much more inclined to, much more sensitive to wasting things. And
Hmm.
so those efficiencies are really showing its head. So capacity is down by comparison to need. And part of your other question was, are we able to transition, I think, from what was
Hmm.
always a slow capacity world that we lived in? We burn coal and keep the grid juiced. Um, and now that we're doing less of that, can we replace that comfort level of having that base load and excess base load with wind and solar and all that sort of stuff? And the truth is, we're in
Hmm.
a transition right now. Can we get there? Yes, but it's going to, again, just like the big ship, it's going to take a long time for our transmission grid to be able to keep itself at fully operational with power that is less predictable.
I think this one might be a bit more up your sector specifically, but um, like, what are past sort of policy initiatives that have played a role in encouraging a transition to cleaner energy in the Midwest? And I guess going forward, what role do other large groups, interest groups like universities, have in the Midwest region on influencing this transition to cleaner energy?
Yeah, here's something for a Google search for you. This was going on in a variety of scales throughout the country in the
Mhm.
late 90s. Um, there was a program called NIPSCO Choice.
Mhm.
And NIPSCO, NIPSCO, which stands for Northern Indiana Public Service Company, it's a NiSource company, and I'm not even sure who owns who now. Basically, what that was back then, again, 25 years ago, was a program to allow for customers to choose what kind of generating power their purchasing was contributing to the grid. And it was very difficult for people to understand it. It was a difficult, you know, it was difficult for everybody back then. Right now, it probably would be so much easier because we've just grown comfortable with different energy sources. 25 years ago, especially in Indiana, people just thought coal power. That's it.
Hmm.
And 25 years ago, 90% of our power, maybe more, was generated by, coal that was locally
Hmm.
mined. What happens there is that if you and I decide that we only want to be paying for power that's contributing to the grid
Hmm.
equal to the amount of power that we're using, we only want that to be solar, or we only want it to be wind, or we want to make sure it's not coal or it's not
Hmm.
nuclear for whatever reason that we have. The NIPSCO choice program allowed for you to choose based on price uh, the kind of power that you're contributing to the grid. Choice programs all over the country were going on back then. My role at the commission was to help educate people with what that program really meant. What was hard was to explain to you, Raj, at your electric power account at your apartment, that if you've decided you're only going to pay for wind generated power, does that mean that the only power that's coming to your house was generated by wind? People, I would have to talk about this over and over and over again. Well, no, you're burning power that's delivered to you. You don't get to choose what's delivered to you. You're choosing to purchase what's being sent to the total grid. And so the mix of what goes into the grid was what was the intended desired change of the portfolio.
Hmm.
And the program was not wildly successful. It stayed in place for a long time, but wasn't wildly successful in that people walked away feeling better about what their consumer role was doing to the grid mix. But what it did for me was it helped people understand that if you are going to stand up and insist on green power or renewable power or a departure from coal, you can contribute that perspective to the grid. And I think that that's what's happening now, 25 years later, much more
Hmm.
readily. People understand it better now because a generation has, been
Yeah.
confronted with it and all of that sort of stuff. So a lot like your first question, what kind of pressure is there? Well, if Walmart in its distribution centers, or if General Motors in its plants, uh, and they did this a lot long before it was an offering made to the general public, they would insist on certain mixes being part of what they're buying.
Hmm.
And that pressure, that actual purchasing power, is the thing that I think puts an incredible amount of pressure. The people in the boardroom at Walmart or GM or wherever sits down and says, look, we need to be able to tell our customers, our stakeholders and our shareholders, that we are doing our part to be environmental stewards. And so we want to be able to tell them that we insist on this kind of energy mix.
Hmm.
And to be able to tell them that with credibility, they have to do it. And
Yeah.
so when they call Duke Energy and say, look, this is what we're paying for, we're going to pay for this mix, half of it natural gas, half of it renewable, none of it coal. So that when
Hmm.
we tell our customers this is what we're buying, we have documentation to show that's true. And so that kind of pressure in choice programs and in portfolio contribution programs actually matters an incredible amount in moving utility companies away from the
Hmm.
generating sources that are no longer desired by people like you and me as individuals, but also large industries who are burning large amounts of power
Hmm.
um, every day. So I don't remember the question now that I've been talking so long, but that's the kind of pressure that is when you ask about grassroots when we first started talking.
Hmm.
That's really a grassroots thing when you and I do it. It's more of a grass tops thing when large users do it, or even conglomerates or associations of large users do it. And that kind of pressure is the kind of thing that encourages clean power plans and Biden and Green New Deal type stuff, because what policymakers are wanting to do is not is consistent with what the roots want to do, but there's
Hmm.
also the consumer role on a small and a large scale, also
Hmm.
putting that same pressure on the market to modernize the way it does things.
Okay, so this is a question that I didn't write down, but it came to me as we were talking. And From your perspective, considering I've only been here at IU for 2 years now, my sophomore year, um, like I know that I tried to look this up on Google, but the power plant we have here on campus, I know that there were some restoration works to make it more clean energy, but has there ever been a push to move away from using a power plant on campus? Is there like does faculty talk about that? Was there ever a student push in the previous few years? Just because that's something I've been personally curious about, since not many schools, I think, have a coal power plant you can just walk right past.
Yeah, here's something for your research, and I'm not wildly familiar with it. I learned a little bit about I actually learned a little bit about I use self-generating situation when I was doing a project for the Nature Conservancy, not as somebody who works at IU and spends a good chunk of his time on campus there. Um, Ball State University actually has a fantastic uh, energy generating situation there. They have a chilled water plant, and
Mhm,
it's an elaborate system that they're very proud of, and they should be. And so one thing that you could do if you're interested in that perspective, I would compare IU to what Ball State's doing.
mhm,
It's just a couple hours up the road. It's a state university, just like IU is, and they are doing something that's pretty innovative, and they're very proud of, and it's very green. And so so it's something that's readily available and flies under the radar, I think, a lot here in Indiana, unless you're doing a project or learning stuff like you're learning right now.
mhm,
I'm not completely versed on how it operates. I think that it makes companies like Duke
mhm,
Energy unhappy when a large organization, a large customer like IU should be for them and um, is doing a lot of the stuff that they would rather sell to IU.
yeah,
They're generating it themselves. It's kind of like all the people who in Indiana who grow their own corn or grow their own
yeah,
tomatoes. The tomato dealers are like, ugh, I wish you'd quit doing that because I've got tomatoes I want to sell you. I would imagine that Duke wished it would operate differently. And I think that Ball State might actually be in Indiana, Michigan's district, but a service territory. So it's less of a problem there. But one of the shifts away from baseload power with coal is that you're going to have large organizations, campus type organizations like IU, but the campus organizations like Roche Diagnostics in the northeast part of Indianapolis.
mhm,
They have a large campus with multiple buildings that they could probably figure out a way to power a large chunk of that campus with just solar power. If they put panels everywhere, they could probably power a big chunk of their campus. And so the move away from baseload encourages not just places like IU, which have been there for, however long the campus has been there, 200 years, and they built that power plant when it made sense. No one would do that now. I mean, no one would build a power plant on a college campus now, especially
mhm,
that burns coal. But what we would do now, which it would almost be malfeasance not to consider this, would be to supplement your power with something that's easy to generate, like with putting solar panels on every building. To me, I don't see any reason why every building on IU's campus doesn't have solar panels all over it.
mhm,
I don't get that. I mean,
mhm,
over time, that's gonna pay off in so many different ways. It's not funny. Now, do you want to look at it on top of those limestone buildings that are so beautiful and we're so proud of? A lot of people would say no. But to me, a
mhm,
solar panel on top of that limestone building is a thing of beauty. And so because it just makes efficient sense, it's modern
mhm,
sense. So I love the fact that we do some generating at IU because of that very thing. We have enough space, enough real estate, and enough wherewithal in a variety of ways to do a lot of self-generating and
mhm,
uh, save lots of ways, not just in money, but also in environmental contributions, and in setting an example that we should be thinking more deeply about where we get our energy from instead of just saying, here I am in Southern Indiana, and this is Duke's, service
yeah,
territory. Duke, give me whatever you want to give me, and I'll just take it.
mhm,
That is so 20th century.
mhm,
We shouldn't be thinking like that anymore, and especially large organizations should be thinking not just how they've been successful at generating their own power, but how they could do it even more efficient going forward.
last question I have for you today, from what I was able to find online, and I know historically the Midwest has been just a huge, like, one of the biggest sort of industries here is coal. Would you like? Do you have any thoughts on maybe the change in like energy from cleaner energy? Like, how will that impact jobs? Because one of like the most I think like frequent defenses of coal power plant is that it employs people. What would you? Do you have any thoughts on that? What would you say to someone maybe using that as an argument?
Yeah, I get exhausted with that insight. I mean, before you were even done asking the question, I was already like, oh, here we go. Um, I went to high school in Vincennes, Indiana, which is halfway in between Terre Haute and Evansville, and on the Illinois border, in the southern part of the state, and in the Illinois basin. There were a
Mhm,
lot of people that were in the area that worked in different parts of the coal industry down there. A lot of farmers, a lot of pig farmers, a lot of soybean farmers, some corn, but you get the picture of, if you drove that stretch of road, which you're probably not ever going to do in the 4 years that you're at IU. At least I would encourage you not to, because it's not pretty. But that's where those workers are.
mhm,
Um, and when I first started working in the state house, in and around the state house, and in agencies in the '90s, that conversation we had all the time.
mhm,
The coal jobs were also were union jobs, and so coal mining and mainly strip mining in that area, um, was made up not just of jobs, but union jobs at a time when unions were strong in this regard. The split politically in Indiana, all the way up until the late 2000 aughts, was the Chamber of Commerce and the Manufacturing Association versus organized labor. In unorganized labor, you had all the people that worked in manufacturing plants. You had the State Teachers Association, which was very strong and powerful at the time, and you had coal. That's who mattered. And so the coal interests were also a lot like manufacturing. They had owners over here with the commerce people, but all their employees were on the other side. And so that was the political split. Now that's the split of R&D and all that is a lot different now. But it was that distinct when you came to the state house. Now,
mhm,
having set the table that way, tough shit is my response to all the people who are doing something and selling a product, just like Southern Indiana and Northern Kentucky was also a bastion for tobacco growing.
mhm,
And tobacco has become a product that people use less and less for obvious reasons.
mhm,
Uh, Nobody mourns the loss of tobacco jobs in this part of the state. They might mourn it a little bit in the Carolinas, but we had tobacco growing here as well in the southern part of the state and the northern part of Kentucky. The truth is that there are so many more jobs available for, if you're looking at in a macro sense, available in the green power generating field than
mhm,
coal had, even 10 or 20 years ago, that shift just needs to occur. The innovative types, whether they're entrepreneurs or public policy types that are in coal areas like West Virginia, like the Illinois Basin area, um, that that can see what's happening,
mhm,
should be investing in the replacement, and the replacement is obvious. It's from coal and dirty power generation to clean. Now we see that in macro level. The problem is that when coal jobs disappear, the innovative jobs are happening in other places. The truth is that if you were going to spend your entire career, like if you left school right now and went into coal mining, I would
mhm,
say that's going to get you through the year. What are you going to do when that job disappears? Because it is inevitable. And so that inevitability should be forcing people to make better, not better, but modern choices about how they generate. We still have that pressure to some extent in the Indiana
mhm,
state, trying to protect coal jobs. It's a fool's errand.
mhm,
And there's no other way of describing it. People are hanging on to a dying energy source, which is not the source that we should be using. And so I would rather inject some rationality and logic into that industry and say, look, this is
mhm.
going on. You might as well start getting your people ready for other forms of income generation, because these jobs are not going to be there for them long term.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, like that's all I have for you. Like, let me end the record.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Huge, huge, huge thank you to Professor Leppert for agreeing to have this conversation with me. What you guys saw was a edited down version of the whole thing. So there was a lot of great content in there, and I really, really, really appreciate Professor choosing to take time out of his day to speak with me. Even though there were so many amazing insights, I really wish I had muted my microphone or something. Like, I didn't really showed up so many times just grinning because I'm agreeing with something Professor was saying. But that aside, genuinely, I'm not being sarcastic when I say this. I really recommend buying his book, Flipping the Circle. I did get a free copy of it from my class, so unless you want to come to IU and enroll in the same section that I did, you're gonna have to buy it. Tough luck, but he is an amazing person for being willing to talk to me about this in such a casual conversation. And I really think he deserves the support. So if you guys are at all interested by what Professor Leppert was saying, check out his website, check out his book. But all that aside, thank you guys so much for watching. Please, again, leave all your comments, questions, whatever down below. More than happy to answer them. Sorry this was a long video. Next one's going to be a lot shorter, but I hope to keep uploading soon. I have a huge backlog I need to work through, so expect to see more uploads. See you guys.